It's Angela with Broadhead Memorial Public Library, back for another week of Have You Heard? We are still reading Charlotte's Web by E.B. White with illustrations by Garth Williams. Before we start, we just want to give another thanks to Harper & Row Publishers and Scholastic for allowing us to read this book for you. Today, if you want, while you listen, if you want to get some paper and some crayons or a pencil or markers and draw while you're listening to the video, that's always something you can do. Drawing and reading is great for your brain. So think about that. If you want to pause the video right now, if you're not watching it live, pause the video and go grab some paper and crayons. Go ahead and do that. If not, we are going to get started. So we had just left off where Wilbur met Charlotte, his new friend that he is not so sure of. So let's see what happens next. All right, I'm gonna sit back a little. Chapter 6, Summer Days. The early summer days on the farm are the happiest and fairest days of the year. Lilacs bloom and make sweet air and then fade. Apple blossoms come with the lilacs, and the bees visit around among the apple trees. The days grow warm and soft. School ends and children have time to play and to fish for trout in the brook. Avery often brought a trout home in his pocket, warm and stiff and ready to be fried for supper. I would never put a fish in my pocket. Now that school was over, Fern visited the barn almost every day to sit quietly on her stool. The animals treated her as an equal. The sheep lay calmly at her feet. Around the 1st of July, the work horses were hitched to the mowing machine. Mr. Zuckerman climbed into the seat and drove into the field. All morning you could hear the rattle of the machines as it went around and around while the tall grass fell down behind the cutter bar in long green swatches. Next day, if there was no thunder shower, all hands would help rake and pitch and load, and the hay would be hauled to the barn in the high hay wagon, and Fern and Avery riding on top of the load. Then the hay would be hoisted, sweet and warm, into the big loft until the whole barn seemed like a wonderful bed of timothy and clover. It was fine to jump into and perfect to hide in, and sometimes Avery would find a little grass snake in the hay, and it would add to the other things in his pocket. I don't know that I'd put a snake in my pocket either. Early summer days are a jubilee time for birds. In the fields, around the house, in the barn, in the woods, in the swamp, everywhere, love and songs and nests and eggs. From the edge of the woods, the white-throated sparrow, which must come all the way from Boston, calls, "Oh, Peabody, Peabody, Peabody." On an apple bough, the phoebe teeters and wags its tail and says, "Phoebe, Phoebe." The song sparrow, who knows how brief and lovely life is, says, "Sweet, sweet, sweet interlude, sweet, sweet, sweet interlude." If you enter the barn, the swallows swoop down from their nests and scold. "Cheeky, cheeky," they say. In early summer, there are plenty of things for a child to eat and drink and suck and chew. Dandelion stems are full of milk. Clover heads are loaded with nectar. The Frigidaire is full of ice-cold drinks. Everywhere you look is life. Even the little ball of spit on the weed stalk, if you poke it apart, has a green worm inside it. And on the underside of the leaf of the potato vine are the bright orange eggs of a potato bug. It was on a day in early summer that the goose eggs hatched. This was an important event in the barn cellar. Fern was there, sitting on her stool when it happened. Except for the goose herself, Charlotte was the first to know that the goslings had at last arrived. The goose knew a day in advance that they were coming. She could hear their weak voices calling from inside the egg. She knew that they were in a desperately cramped position inside the shell and were most anxious to break through and get out. So she sat quite still and talked less than usual. When the first gosling poked its gray-green head through the goose's feathers and looked around, Charlotte spied it and made the announcement. "I am sure," she said, "that every one of us here will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitting effort and patience on the part of our friend the goose, she now has something to show for it. The goslings have arrived. May I offer my sincere congratulations?" "Thank you, thank you, thank you," said the goose, nodding and bowing shamelessly. "Thank you," said the gander. "Congratulations," shouted Wilbur. "How many goslings are there? I can only see one." "There are 7, said the goose. "Fine," said Charlotte. 7 is a lucky number." "Luck had nothing to do with this," said the goose. "It was good management and hard work." At this point, Templeton showed his nose from his hiding place under Wilbur's trough. He glanced at Fern, then crept cautiously toward the goose, keeping close to the wall. Everyone watched him, for he was not well liked and not trusted. "Look," he began in his sharp voice. "You say you have 7 goslings. There were 8 eggs. What happened to the other egg? Why didn't it hatch?" "It's a dud, I guess," said the goose. "What are you going to do with it?" continued Templeton, his little round beady eyes fixed on the goose. "You can have it," replied the goose. "Roll it away and add it to your nasty collection of things." Templeton had a habit of picking up unusual objects around the farm and storing them in his home. He saved everything. Certainly, said the gander. "You may have the egg. But I'll tell you one thing, Templeton. If I ever catch you poking your ugly nose around our goslings, I'll give you the worst pounding a rat ever took." And the gander opened his strong wings and beat the air with them to show his power. He was strong and brave, but the truth is, both the goose and the gander were worried about Templeton, and with good reason. A rat had no morals, no conscience, no scruples, no consideration, no decency, no milk of rodent kindness, no compunctions, no higher feelings, no friendliness, no anything. He would kill a gosling if he could get away with it. The goose knew that. Everyone knew that. With her broad bill, the goose pushed the unhatched egg out of the nest, and the entire company watched in disgust while the rat rolled it away. Even Wilbur, who could eat almost anything, was appalled. "Imagine wanting a junky old rotten egg," he muttered. "A rat is a rat," said Charlotte. She laughed a tinkling little laugh. "But my friends, if that ancient egg ever breaks, this barn will be untenable." "What does that mean?" asked Wilbur. "It means nobody will be able to live here on account of the smell. A rotten egg is a regular stink bomb." "It won't break," snarled Templeton. "I know what I'm doing. I handle stuff like this all the time." He disappeared into his tunnel, pushing the goose egg in front of him. He pushed and nudged till he succeeded in rolling it into his lair under the trough. That afternoon, when the wind had died down and the barnyard was quiet and warm, the gray goose led her 7 goslings off the nest and out into the world. Mr. Zuckerman spied them when he came with Wilbur's supper. "Well, hello there," he said, smiling all over. "Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 baby geese. Now isn't that lovely?" Chapter 7. Bad News. Wilbur liked Charlotte better and better each day. Her campaign against insects seemed sensible and useful. Hardly anyone around the farm had a good word to say for a fly. Flies spent their time pestering others. The cows hated them. The horses detested them. The sheep loathed them. Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman were always complaining about them and putting up screens. Wilbur admired the way Charlotte managed. He was particularly glad that she always put her victim to sleep before eating it. "It's real thoughtful of you to do that, Charlotte," he said. "Yes," she replied in her sweet musical voice. "I always give them an anesthetic so they won't feel the pain. It's a little service I throw in." As the days went by, Wilbur grew and grew. He ate 3 big meals a day. He spent long hours lying on his side, half asleep, dreaming pleasant dreams. He enjoyed good health, and he gained a lot of weight. One afternoon, when Fern was sitting on her stool, the oldest sheep walked into the barn and stopped to pay a call on Wilbur. "Hello," she said. "Seems to me you're putting on weight." "Yes, I guess I am," replied Wilbur. "At my age, it's a good idea to keep gaining." "Just the same, I don't envy you," said the old sheep. "You know why they're fattening you up, don't you?" "No," said Wilbur. "Well, I don't like to spread bad news," said the sheep, "but they're fattening you up because they're going to kill you, that's why." "They're going to what?" screamed Wilbur. Fern grew rigid on her stool. "Kill you. Turn you into smoked bacon and ham," continued the old sheep. "Almost all young pigs get murdered by the farmer as soon as the real cold winter sets in. There's a regular conspiracy around here to kill you at Christmas time. Everybody is in on the plot. Lurvy, Zuckerman, even John Arable." "Mr. Arable?" sobbed Wilbur. "Fern's father?" "Certainly. When a pig is to be butchered, everybody helps. I'm an old sheep, and I've seen the same thing, the same old business year after year. Arable arrives with his .22, shoots the—" "Stop!" screamed Wilbur. "I don't want to die. Save me, somebody, save me." Fern was just about to jump up when a voice was heard. "Be quiet, Wilbur," said Charlotte, who had been listening to the awful conversation. "I can't be quiet," screamed Wilbur, racing up and down. "I don't want to be killed. I don't want to die. Is it true what the old sheep says, Charlotte? Is it true they're going to kill me when the cold weather comes?" "Well," said the spider, plucking thoughtfully at her web, "the old sheep has been around this barn a long time. She has seen many a spring pigs come and go. If she says they plan to kill you, I'm sure it's true. It's also the dirtiest trick I've ever heard of. What people don't think of." Wilbur burst into tears. "I don't want to die," he moaned. "I want to stay alive right here on my comfortable manure pile with all my friends. I want to breathe the beautiful air and lie in the beautiful sun." "You're certainly making a beautiful noise," snapped the old sheep. "I don't want to die," screamed Wilbur, throwing himself to the ground. "You shall not die," said Charlotte briskly. "What? Really?" cried Wilbur. "Who's going to save me?" "I am," said Charlotte. "How?" asked Wilbur. "That remains to be seen, but I'm going to save you, and I want you to quiet down immediately. You're carrying on childish ways. Stop your crying. I can't stand hysterics." Chapter 8. A Talk at Home. On Sunday morning, Mr. and Mrs. Arable and Fern were sitting at breakfast in the kitchen. Avery had finished and was upstairs looking for his slingshot. "Did you know that Uncle Homer's goslings had hatched?" asked Fern. "How many?" asked Mr. Arable. "7," replied Fern. "There were 8 eggs, but one didn't hatch, and the goose told Templeton she didn't want it anymore, so he took it away." "The goose did what?" asked Mrs. Arable, gazing at her daughter with a funny, worried look. "Told Templeton she didn't want the egg anymore," replied Fern. "Who's Templeton?" asked Mrs. Arable. "He's the rat," replied Fern. "None of us like him much." "Who's us?" asked Mr. Arable. "Oh, everybody in the barn cellar. Wilbur and the sheep and the lambs and the goose and the gander and the goslings and Charlotte and me." "Charlotte?" said Mrs. Arable. "Who's Charlotte?" "She's Wilbur's best friend. She's terribly clever." "What does she look like?" asked Mrs. Arable. "Well," said Fern thoughtfully, "she has 8 legs. All spiders do, I guess." "Charlotte is a spider?" asked Fern's mother. Fern nodded. "A big gray one. She has a web across the top of Wilbur's doorway. She catches flies and sucks their blood. Wilbur adores her." "Does he really?" said Mrs. Arable rather vaguely. She was staring at Fern with a worried expression on her face. "Oh, yes, Wilbur adores Charlotte," said Fern. "Do you know what Charlotte said when the goslings hatched?" "I haven't the faintest idea," said Mr. Arable. "Tell us." Well, when the first gosling stuck its little head out from under the goose, I was sitting on my stool in the corner, and Charlotte was on her web. She made a speech. She said, "I'm sure that every one of us here in the barn cellar will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitting effort and patience on the part of the goose, she now has something to show for it." Don't you think that was a pleasant thing for her to say? "Yes, I do," said Mrs. Arable. "And now, Fern, it's time to get ready to go for Sunday school, and tell Avery to get ready. And this afternoon you can tell me more about what goes on in Uncle Homer's barn. Aren't you spending quite a lot of time there? You go there almost every afternoon, don't you?" "I like it there," replied Fern. She wiped her mouth and ran upstairs. After she had left the room, Mrs. Arable spoke in a low voice to her husband. "I worry about Fern," she said. "Did you hear the way she rambled on about the animals pretending they talked?" Mr. Arable chuckled. "Maybe they do talk," he said. "I've sometimes wondered. At any rate, don't worry about Fern. She's just got a lively imagination. Kids think they hear all sorts of things." "Just the same, I do worry about her," replied Mrs. Arable. "I think I shall ask Dr. Dorian about her the next time I see him. He loves Fern almost as much as we do, and I want him to know how strangely she is acting about the pig and everything. I don't think it's normal. You know perfectly well animals don't talk." Mr. Arable grinned. "Maybe our ears aren't as sharp as Fern's," he said. Chapter 9. Wilbur's Boast. A spider's web is stronger than it looks. Although it is made of thin, delicate strands, a web is not easily broken. However, a web gets torn every day by the insects that kick around in it, and a spider must rebuild it when it gets full of holes. Charlotte liked to do her weaving during the late afternoon, and Fern liked to sit nearby and watch. One afternoon she heard the most interesting conversation and witnessed a strange event. "You have awfully hairy legs, Charlotte," said Wilbur as the spider busily worked at her task. "My legs are hairy for a good reason," replied Charlotte. "Furthermore, each leg of mine has 7 sections: a coxa, a throat chanter, a femur, a patella, a tibia, a metatarsus, and the tarsus." Wilbur sat bolt upright. "You're kidding me," he said. No, I'm not either." "Say those names again. I didn't catch them the first time." "Coxa, trochanter, femur, patella, tibia, metatarsus, and tarsus." "Goodness," said Wilbur, looking down at his own chubby legs. "I don't think my legs have 7 sections." "Well," said Charlotte, "you and I lead different lives. You don't have to spin a web. That makes real leg work." "I could spin a web if I tried," said Wilbur, boasting. "I've just never tried." "Let's see you do it," said Charlotte. Fern chuckled softly, and her eyes grew wide with love for the pig. "Okay," replied Wilbur. "You coach me and I'll spin one. It must be a lot of fun to spin a web. How do I start?" "Take a deep breath," said Charlotte, smiling. Wilbur breathed deeply. "Now climb to the highest place you can get to, like this." Charlotte raced up to the top of the doorway. Wilbur scrambled to the top of the manure pile. "Very good," said Charlotte. "Now make an attachment with your spinnerets. Hurl yourself into space and let out a drag line as you go down." Wilbur hesitated a moment when he jumped into the air. He glanced hastily behind to see if a piece of rope was following him to check his fall, but nothing seemed to be happening in his rear, and the next thing he knew, he landed with a thump. "Oomph," he grunted. Charlotte laughed so hard her web began to sway. "What did I do wrong?" asked the pig, when he recovered from his bump. "Nothing," said Charlotte. "It was a nice try." "I think I'll try again," said Wilbur cheerfully. "I believe what I need is a little piece of string to hold me." The pig walked out of his yard. "You there, Templeton?" he called. The rat poked his head out from under the trough. "Got a little piece of string I could borrow?" asked Wilbur. "I need it to spin a web." "Yes, indeed," replied Templeton, who saved string. "No trouble at all. Anything to oblige." He crept down into his hole, pushed the goose egg out of the way, and returned with an old piece of dirty white string. Wilbur examined it. "This is just the thing," he said. "Tie one end to my tail, will you, Templeton?" Wilbur crouched low, with his thin, curly tail toward the rat. Templeton seized the string, passed it around the end of the pig's tail, and tied 2 half hitches. Charlotte watched in delight. Like Fern, she was truly fond of Wilbur, whose smelly pen and stale food attracted the flies that she needed, and she was proud to see that he was not a quitter and was willing to try again to spin a web. While the rat and the spider and the little girl watched, Wilbur climbed again to the top of the manure pile, full of energy and hope. "Everybody watch!" he cried, and summoning all his strength, he threw himself into the air head first. The string trailed behind him, but as he neglected to fasten the other end to anything, it didn't really do any good, and Wilbur landed with a thud, crushed and hurt. His tears came to his eyes. Templeton grinned. Charlotte just sat quietly. After a bit she spoke. "You can't spin a web, Wilbur, and I advise you to put your idea out of your mind. You lack 2 things needed for spinning a web." "What are they?" asked Wilbur sadly. "You lack a set of spinnerets, and you lack know-how. But cheer up. You don't need a web. Zuckerman supplies you with 3 big meals a day. Why should you worry about trapping food?" Wilbur sighed. "You're ever so much cleverer and brighter than I am, Charlotte. I guess I was just trying to show off. Serves me right." Templeton untied his string and took it back to his home. Charlotte returned to her weaving. "You needn't feel too badly, Wilbur," she said. "Not many creatures can spin webs. Even men aren't as good at it as spiders, although they think they're pretty good, and they'll try anything. Did you ever hear of the Queensboro Bridge?" Wilbur shook his head. "Is it a web?" "Sort of," replied Charlotte. "But do you know how long it took men to build it? 8 whole years. My goodness, I would have starved to death waiting that long. I can make a web in a single evening." "What do people catch on the Queensboro Bridge? Bugs?" asked Wilbur. "No," said Charlotte. "They don't catch anything. They just keep trotting back and forth across the bridge, thinking there's something better on the other side. If they'd hang head down at the top of the thing and wait quietly, maybe something good would come along. But no, with men it's rush, rush, rush every minute. I'm glad I'm a sedentary spider." "What does sedentary mean?" asked Wilbur. "Means I sit still a good part of the time and don't go wandering all over creation. I know a good thing when I see it, and my web is a good thing. I stay put and wait for what comes. Gives me a chance to think." "Well, I'm sort of sedentary myself, I guess," said the pig. "I have to hang around here whether I want to or not. I know where I'd really like to be this evening." "Where?" "In the forest, looking for beechnuts and truffles and delectable roots, pushing leaves aside with my wonderful strong nose, searching and sniffing along the ground, smelling, smelling, smelling." "You smell just the way you are," remarked the lamb, who had just walked by. "I can smell you from here. You're the smelliest creature in the place." Wilbur hung his head. His eyes grew wet with tears. Charlotte noticed his embarrassment, and she spoke sharply to the lamb. "Let Wilbur alone," she said. "He has a perfect right to smell, considering his surroundings. You're no bundle of sweet peas yourself. Furthermore, you are interrupting a very pleasant conversation." "What were we talking about, Wilbur, when we were so rudely interrupted?" "Oh, I don't remember," said Wilbur. "It doesn't make a difference. Let's not talk any more for a while, Charlotte. I'm getting sleepy. You go ahead and finish fixing your web, and I'll just lie here and watch you. It's a lovely evening." Wilbur stretched out on his side. Twilight settled over Zuckerman's barn, and a feeling of peace. Fern knew it was almost supper time, but she couldn't bear to leave. Swallows passed on silent wings in and out of the doorways, bringing food to their young ones. From across the road, a bird sang, "Whippoorwill, whippoorwill." Lurvy sat down under an apple tree and lit his pipe. The animals sniffed the familiar smell of the strong tobacco. Wilbur heard the trill of the tree toad and the occasional slamming of the kitchen door. All these sounds made him feel comfortable and happy, for he loved life and loved to be part of the world on a summer evening. But as he lay there, he remembered what the old sheep had told him. The thought of death came to him, and he began to tremble with fear. "Charlotte," he said softly. "Yes, Wilbur?" "I don't want to die." "Of course you don't," said Charlotte in a comforting voice. "I just love it here in the barn," said Wilbur. "I love everything about this place." "Of course you do," said Charlotte. "We all do." The goose appeared, followed by her 7 goslings. They thrust their little necks out and kept up a musical whistling like a tiny troop of pipers. Wilbur listened to the sound with love in his heart. "Charlotte," he said. "Yes," said the spider. "Were you serious when you promised you would keep them from killing me?" "I was never more serious in my life. I'm not going to let you die, Wilbur." "How are you going to save me?" asked Wilbur, whose curiosity was very strong at this point. "Well," said Charlotte vaguely, "I don't really know, but I'm working on a plan." "That's wonderful," said Wilbur. "How is the plan coming, Charlotte? Have you gone very far with it? Is it coming along pretty well?" Wilbur was trembling again, but Charlotte was cool and collected. "Oh, it's coming all right," she said lightly. "The plan is still in its early stages and hasn't completely shaped up yet, but I'm working on it." When do you work on it?" begged Wilbur. "When I'm hanging head down at the top of my web. That's when I do my thinking, because then all the blood is in my head." "I'd be only too glad to help in any way I can." "Oh, I'll work it out alone," said Charlotte. "I can think better if I think alone." "All right," said Wilbur, "but don't fail to let me know if there's anything I can do to help, no matter how slight." "Well," replied Charlotte, "you must try to build yourself up. I want you to get plenty of sleep and stop worrying. Never hurry and never worry. Chew your food thoroughly and eat every bite of it, except you must leave just enough for Templeton. Gain weight and stay well. That's the way you can help. Keep fit and don't lose your nerve. Do you think you understand?" "Yes, I understand," said Wilbur. "Go along to bed then," said Charlotte. "Sleep is important." Wilbur trotted over to the darkest corner of his pen and threw himself down. He closed his eyes in another minute, and in another minute he spoke. "Charlotte," he said. "Yes, Wilbur?" "May I go out to my trough and see if I left any of my supper? I think I left just a tiny bit of mashed potato." "Very well," said Charlotte, "but I want you in bed again without delay." Wilbur started to race out of his yard. "Slowly, slowly," said Charlotte. "Never hurry and never worry." Wilbur checked himself and crept slowly to his trough. He found a bit of potato, chewed it carefully, swallowed it, and walked back to bed. He closed his eyes and was silent for a while. "Charlotte," he said in a whisper. "Yes?" "May I get a drink of milk? I think there were a few drops of milk left in my trough." "No, the trough is dry, and I want you to go to sleep. No more talking. Close your eyes and go to sleep." Wilbur shut his eyes. Fern got up from her stool and started for home, her mind full of everything she had seen and heard. "Good night, Charlotte," said Wilbur. "Good night, Wilbur." There was a pause. "Good night, Charlotte." "Good night, Wilbur." "Good night." "Good night." All right, well, we are going to stop there for today. If you are participating in our summer reading program, make sure you write down 25 minutes of reading time for the day, and we will be back tomorrow with more of Charlotte's Web. All right, everyone, have a fantastic day. Bye.